Shepard wasn't on tape very often. Most of his shows were done live. On those occasions when he couldn't be there live, he taped a fresh show. There were no substitute hosts, no reruns. One of the occasions when he couldn't be there live was in the middle of the summer of 1963. He reported back to us the next night.
We left 47th Street. I rode on a bus with maybe 200,000 other people all riding on buses towards Washington, D.C. And one of the great things that happened was not more than 15 or 20 minutes after we got on the road with the bus, other buses started to pass us in the darkness. We had a very old, terrible bus. And you know, I'll tell you, have you ever ridden on a bus, a cross-town bus, all the way to Washington? I'm serious, a lot of people did. The bus that was with us was a cross-town bus. They just took the cross-town sign out, and everybody sat on those plastic seats and went all the way to Washington and back. And I mean, there wasn't an available inch in those buses that was not used. Lunches, and there was all kinds of stuff, you know, just stuff to sit on and fans to wipe the sweat off your brow. Hot, oh boy. Well, we started out. It was just a fantastic experience. That's all I can say. It was a fantasy in so many ways. There are a few occasions when you are reminded of the fact of how diverse humanity really is. On the one hand, they are capable of the most incredible humanity. I hate to use such a word as humanity applied to human beings, but I say that probably only a squirrel is capable of humanity in his attitude towards people. But they are capable of things which you could not believe after having lived in an urban world in the 20th century. And, of course, they're capable of the other. And you keep seeing the other superimposed in your own mind. The other. You know what I mean by the other. But let me say, we were out on the road not more than, maybe 20 minutes. And people were in a strange mood. To begin with, I thought at first, thinking about this thing for weeks in advance, I had thought about it. I had talked with guys who were planning to go and arranging this thing, that I had all kinds of ideas in my mind about the way it would be. Just like all of us have ideas in our head about how history is. I'm sure you have ideas about how it must have been like to be in Germany in the 20s. Well, it wasn't. Not the way you think it was. I'm sure you probably thought you have ideas of how it must have been like at the time Washington was crossing the Delaware. Forget it. It wasn't. It wasn't the way you think it was. I was not there. I just know one thing. It wasn't the way you think it was. And I have found that very few things are the way you think they are. I say that in caps. Well, let me say one of the great moments was to be riding along in this bus in the sort of semi-dark. It's getting to be dawn now. Everybody's feeling rotten and tired, and there's a wild sort of peculiar excitement of the unknown. No one knew quite what to expect. And what was, I thought, quite significant, no one even talked about the event to which we were going. Now that, I think, is interesting. I waited, I listened carefully. Nobody said a word about it. They talked about the bus. They talked about the sun out there. They talked about the dawn coming up. They talked about the lunch they were carrying. They talked about their shoes hurting. They talked about everything. It was as though nobody wanted to talk about where we were going and why. And particularly the people who were really deeply involved in it, the Negroes we had with us. But driving along through the darkness in the morning when the sun is coming up over the edges of the horizon, we're whistling along that turnpike, and the bus had a fat crosstown bus driver driving it, and he was hollering, for transfers and stuff all the way, and he just normally, and he was ducking imaginary cabs all the way up there and so on. But we're going along the Jersey Turnpike, and we weren't out on the turnpike more than 5 minutes when other buses started to pass us in the darkness. The peculiar rapport between the buses was insane. It's obvious that you're not going to see a crosstown bus out on the Jersey Turnpike heading south unless there's something going on. This bus was just not the bus headed for Paramus. Well, we're going along there, and in the darkness you see, a bus would go past, And instantly you'd see all these hands out the window waving at our bus. Our bus is waving at them. Great moment. And after a while you got so that it was just normal. A train went past us at one point. There was a train when we got down past off the Jersey Turnpike and over past Philadelphia and on through Delaware. We were skirting a railroad track. And a train went past with maybe 8 or 9 or 10 cars loaded to the gunnels with people. And the whole train was waving at our bus. And we're waving at the train, and the crew was waving out of the front of the locomotive. I'm just describing to you what exactly happened. Well, we arrived on the outskirts of Washington. Well, I must say parenthetically, I have never in my life, including several big operations in the Army, including a lot of organization I've seen in various other armed services and great events that happen in other cities. I've never seen anything like the way the city of Washington handled this thing. Absolutely, it'll be. I imagine in the end, this is going to be a picture book classic among control and preparation for a vast event. Fantastic. And not only that, this is another thing. Every last man that I saw involved in this situation, the police, the MPs, the Red Cross people, were in the most wildly great holiday mood. You just don't expect it from officials, you know. Cops waving and hollering at you and the whole business, everybody cheering and you come in. Well, we came into Washington. I don't know how much of this has been reported. I haven't seen much of it reported in the press. Well, I think because very few reporters came in as a marcher. That's right. I know they went in days before, stayed at the hotel, and that morning they took the big cab down to the Washington Monument, or they took the cab down to the Lincoln Memorial and sat behind the ropes and started a report. Oh, boy. No wonder history, the point is always missed about what happens to me. I'll tell you. Well, we came into the city, and one of the moments I will never in my life forget, I just won't, I know it, was coming into the outskirts of Washington in this bus. A lot of people tired. Boy, have you ever ridden 6 hours on a crosstown bus? Wow. And that seat is like a rock. And we're sweating and the sun is beating down. And we arrived in Washington and the police met the bus immediately. All the buses were lined up for blocks. They stopped them at the outskirts of Washington and they took groups of 6 with a police escort to the proper place where they were to go. Each group of 6 buses was assigned a place. It was fantastic. And there was a cop waiting there with a white helmet. He took you in. All right, let's go now. Come on. And we went. And what was intriguing was to find slowly everybody in the bus is beginning to thaw. Up to this point, they'd expected, people, officialdom, and all that, and they found that the officialdom was as much on their side as anybody. Everybody's going, let's go. We took off. And we're riding along one of the main streets through the slums, by the way, of Washington. And here were hundreds of people on the steps. Little old ladies, grandmas, skinny kids, tough-looking guys who worked as garage mechanics, nuns. Everywhere we went, they're sitting on the porch waving with the greatest, not the kind of waving that says go on in and give them hell, just but a strange, happy, we're glad you're here waving, and gee, hi, how are you? Just a unbelievable feeling all the way through, and they're all out there on the steps and streets waving, and everybody in the bus, of course, is waving. And we finally arrived down at the place where we're parked. And this was a strange moment. We arrived at the place where we were parking. Thousands of buses, and, we're all confused, and they took us a couple of times around the block. And finally we arrived on a side street at 20th and E, wherever the devil that is. And we arrived at 20th and E, and we're parked. And we get out, and everybody is stiff. Oh, boy, everybody was stiff, We'd stopped a couple of times at gas stations on the way down. Everybody's sort of walking around, stiff-legged, bent over sideways, The back of your neck was hurting. And immediately, about 45 people instantly had to go to the John, immediately, which is always what happens when everybody gets off the bus. We sort of walked around, and somebody says, well, let's go to that building over there. There was a big, gray, official-looking building standing to our right, just a very official building. And people started to go down into the driveway of this official building that had big trucks, just ordinary trucks, and guys working in the... They were not connected with the demonstration or anything, just the building working, you see. And the instant the people started to show up, it was a wild moment. They're escorting everybody in to where they can get water. Do you want any coffee? They're cheering you on. Come on. Walk through there, and we went in, and everybody is getting water. And we came back out. It was a very odd experience to have people really concerned about you. They really were worried. They were saying, gee, do you want to sit down? Do you want to, how about some coffee? Hey, get some coffee. And they were just in a building where we walked out, and then out on the street, we started to go to the area where we were all going to assemble. We were all going to assemble where our group was. Our group was to go through and to march down. I don't even remember the streets they marched down. But it was not at all the way I would have imagined or have imagined a demonstration or any of this kind of thing to be like. Everybody's you're walking on the street, and it's like you are suddenly with a million old friends. It was like a family reunion. A strange feeling of, and there wasn't one moment that was phony at all about it. I had people step on my foot and say, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, excuse me." You know, I had a man standing in front of me when there was a big thing going on who says, "Can you see now?" And one of the great moments when we walked through the grove of trees, and we start to walk along the street. I met a lot of old friends, and what really intrigued me was the number of people who didn't come. I will not mention that, but I sure was amazed by the absence of many people who I'd heard do a lot of talking prior to this moment, and they just weren't there. And a lot of people who never said a word are there. That's what really was very intriguing. You know, you never can tell who the people are in any world. I don't care what world it is, a football game, whether you're playing cards, whether you need money. You sure can't tell who it's going to be, who's going to come across. Let me tell you that. Any old GI will tell you that story, that there are a lot of awful tough commandos in basic training. There are a lot of guys that can go up those fences like mad, and there are a lot of men who can shout commands and all that. It's an interesting thing who it is who comes across when the real stuff is flying in the air. It really is intriguing. Well, we're walking along. You never can tell them either. Don't think for a minute you know who it would be. You do not know. I'm sorry, you don't. You don't know who your friends are. You don't know who your enemies are. But we're walking along the street, and everybody's together. And one more thing has to be pointed out. A man told me just when we were walking, and he was a Negro, by the way, and an old friend of mine. He says, you know, he says, I wish my cousin who lives in Paris could see this, could be part of this. He would never understand it, though. He says, this is a purely American thing. He says, the headlines, he says, you know, you read a headline about another country, you don't understand it because you're not Vietnamese, you know. You just don't know. You just don't know what is happening in Belgium because you're not Belgian, you know. It's very difficult to know. And it is very difficult for a European to understand this. Really, I'm sure it is. And so we're walking along, and everybody's sort of standing along the sidelines waving. There are thousands and thousands of white people and colored people. Everybody's just standing there. Guys in offices are cheering out and waving. Nobody reported on this. That all along the line of march, guys are standing in offices waving. And I want to go on record saying beforehand, during the entire day, I did not hear one word that I could construe as being the kind of word that you would hear in demonstrations. I did not see one moment that I could call a moment that gave me one even instant feeling of imminent rabble-rousing or any of this stuff. It was just an amazing attitude towards everything. And we walked along through this crowd, and everybody's standing there waving and so on. And you never saw a more disorganized messing around, shuffling. And we get to the place where it wasn't a parade, you know. I'm sure it's going to sound like a parade, you know. But it wasn't a parade. Nobody was hollering, "Workers unite!" Nobody's yelling, nothing. Everybody's sort of walking along. The sun is coming down. Everybody's cheering, waving. We get to the park where the Lincoln Memorial is. Incidentally, I once again, it reaffirms in my mind one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been in is Washington. And we're coming through, and the sun is coming down through the trees, and millions of people are now gathering. And I don't know how they could estimate the number of people were there. I just don't understand how they come up with these nice, neat, round estimates. Again, this is the reporter at work. He's sitting up there, you know, on the Washington Monument writing down, and I'm sure we're going to take some guy's attitude or his quick decision on who it is. And no doubt it's going to be the most authoritative newspaper's version of who's, you know, of how many guesses. There would be no way to estimate it. I have no idea how they ever came across estimating, because buses were coming in from all directions, everywhere. People were everywhere, and it was just like a great big round, just a sort of a big cloud. It was about as difficult as to tell how big a cloud is, or how many drops are in this cloud. Just sort of a big thing, and we walked through. And then the push started to get rough. And up there on the Washington, or the Lincoln Memorial, the crowd was gathered, and we pushed down into the crowd. And each place, you see, each delegation, if you can call it that, had a little place where it was supposed to be. Of course, it wasn't there. That went out the window with the cloud. And everybody's trying to get it, and they're walking around with their little signs and stuff. And suddenly, through the crowd, is this little tiny band of people coming with a little sign that said Mississippi. That was really a moment. I'll tell you, that was a moment. And everybody is hollering at them and talking, and they're laughing and hollering. It was kind of like a joke, too. It was kind of funny. And they're laughing and they're talking. And incidentally, I must go on record as saying, too, in that Mississippi group, there were more than just a few white people. That should be pointed out. And they're laughing, and everybody's laughing. They got their little signs that said Mississippi, and people are hitting them on the back when they walk through. They'd come all the way up on some crummy old bus, you know, or something. So they're there, and they're standing around there. Well, in the middle of it all, it's the greatest crowd I've ever been in my life. I'll tell you, it's a much greater crowd than you ever see at a ball game, which is supposed to be a fun thing, you know. There was a man standing back of me that had a big white Panama hat on, and he, like so many of the demonstrators, it was obvious that this was a very big moment for him, and he was all dressed up. So many of them were almost all the people. Did you know that? That's an interesting thing, that our delegation was told to wear a jacket, was told to wear a tie, white shirt, and I mean, because this is a thing we're going to that's very important. And so everybody was all dressed up. It was funny to see, as we came into Washington, all the guys putting their jackets on. and it's hot. Oh, boy, was it hot on the bus. Putting their ties on, you know, trying to straighten up their collar and everything else. Because, you know, we're going to the thing. Somebody said it was like going to church with 200,000 people. That's really what it was like. Well, standing back of me was a man, great guy. And he was sort of a little short, stout man, sweating like mad. And he had rimless glasses. And his rimless glasses were all clouded up because he was sweating, and everybody was pushing him, and he had his little signs, and the sign said NAACP Boston branch. And he's holding up this thing. You know, it's a long way from Boston, believe me, to Washington in a bus. So he's holding that sign up there, and then Marian Anderson started to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And the push was so fantastic you could see nothing except those great white columns of the Lincoln Memorial standing over you. And back of you, all the way in the distance, you could see the Washington Monument standing up. Well, this little fat man standing back of me, sweating profusely, and he's holding up his sign, and Marian Anderson started to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And it was, you know, it's the usual kind of Star-Spangled Banner where it's through a PA system, and we're so far away we could hardly hear, you know. And she's singing. You couldn't even distinguish the words, but it was the Star-Spangled Banner. Everybody's standing there. And suddenly a lady about, maybe 5 or 6 feet away, a lady with a big red colored hat on with big white flowers, the official kind of lady, you know what I mean, by the club lady who's always organizing. This is a very club lady type. And she's a big colored lady, and she starts to say, "Will the Brooklyn Corps representatives please assemble over here? Please get over here, Brooklyn Corps representatives." And she's hollering in the middle of the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, the guy behind me says, "Madam, madam." And she looks at him, what? He says, "They're singing the Star-Spangled Banner. We usually are quiet during the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Please. They're singing the Star-Spangled Banner." Well, she sat just with a funny look on her face for a minute, and she turns. Of course, the real organizer is not ever put off by anything so trivial as feelings or emotions. And I suddenly see all these official showbiz types frantically running around getting photographed. And somehow that was the one discordant moment that I had in my own mind. I didn't see any of these great, these people who got their pictures in all the New York Times and all the papers. I didn't see one of those guys march. I'm sorry. I didn't see any of them do any of the stuff that all the poor little people who went down there to do did. And they're up there signing autographs, and they're frantically standing in the way of newsreel cameras and getting their pictures taken, signing autographs as though somehow they vaguely were responsible for goodness. They've come to put official stamp on goodness in the world. And everybody was watching them. They're signing autographs. And all the while they're signing autographs, Martin Luther King is giving his talk, which was a brilliant speech, by the way. Martin Luther King is speaking, and these guys are standing around signing autographs, and the newsreel cameramen are taking their pictures. And even the hard-bitten guys from Life magazine, the Time reporter, there was a guy named Kappa standing next to me, a famous Time reporter, and you could see it was a very funny feeling. It was not a news story. You know what I mean by news story? It was an experience, an actual experience.